The following was written by Nathan Goodman and included in the 3rd issue of The New Leveler. Prisons, the case for abolition. The American state incarcerates over 2 million people. According to Veronica DeRuggi, nonviolent offenders make up more than 60% of the prison and jail population. Nonviolent drug offenders now account for about 1/4 of all inmates, up from less than 10% in 1980, unquote. The state is locking peaceful people in cages on a mass scale. Inside these cages, abuse is rampant. According to David Kaiser and Lovisa Stano, in 2011 and 2012, 3.2% of all people in jail, 4.0% of state and federal prisoners, and 95% of those held in juvenile detention reported having been sexually abused in their current facility during the preceding year, unquote. Most of the sexual abuse is committed by guards rather than inmates. A 2007 study found that the LGBT inmates were sexually assaulted at a rate 15 times higher than that of the general inmate population. Moreover, these numbers only tell the story of sexual abuse that the state recognizes as illegal. In prisons and jails across the country, inmates are forced to strip, expose their genitals, and sometimes even allow guards to digitally penetrate their most private orifices. When penetration is involved, these searches meet the FBI's definition of rape. Quote, the penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, or oral penetration by a sex organ of another person without the consent of the victim, end quote. Even when penetration is not involved, strip searches are humiliating and degrading. They routinely trigger flashbacks and trauma for sexual assault survivors. Yet they are a standard procedure in prisons and jails. If you are booked into a jail, even for something as minor as a traffic stop, the Supreme Court has ruled that it is constitutional for guards to subject you to an invasive strip search. There's a reason Angela Davis calls strip searches, quote, the routinization of sexual abuse. Prisons can also kill inmates. Homeless veteran Jerome Murdow was baked to death by over 100-degree temperatures in a Rikers Island jail cell in New York earlier this year. This is not an isolated incident. Quote, a report issued last month by the University of Texas School of Law's Human Rights Clinic found that at least 14 inmates have died from exposure to extreme heat since 2007 in state correctional facilities, writes Jake Pearson. People often ask, what would we do about rapists and murderers without prisons? But as Dean Spade puts it, quote, the prison is the serial killer, the prison is the serial rapist, unquote. Prisons produce conditions where rape and premature death are rampant, even inevitable. Prisons grant guards total power over prisoners so that they can intimidate and threaten inmates who dare to report rape. They lock inmates in cramped conditions where they are vulnerable to violence and heat death and lack access to health care. Mass incarceration means mass violence. In the wake of America's mass incarceration crisis, politicians and activists across the spectrum are calling for prison reform, but reform may make the problems worse. It's important to remember that prisons themselves were first developed by social reformers who wanted an alternative to corporal punishment and capital punishment. Solitary confinement, which is now recognized as a traumatizing form of psychological torture, was first proposed by Quakers as a form of introspection that could be more humane than the whip. Since then, we have seen well-intentioned reforms help expand the prison system's power. Women's prisons were opened in response to campaigns to end sexual assaults against women in men's prisons. The construction of these prisons paved the way for dramatic increases in incarceration of women. Victoria Law writes that in the decade following the opening of the first women's prison in Illinois in 1859, quote, the total number of women sentenced to prison tripled. Recently, we have seen similar processes in the development of transgender wings in prisons and jails in response to abuses of transgender inmates in the general prison population. The Smarter Sentencing Act, which is currently being debated in Congress, exemplifies this, quote, one step forward, 2 steps back, unquote, approach to prison reform. The bill would eliminate some harsh mandatory minimum sentences for nonviolent drug offenses. However, thanks to the log rolling and bundling that is necessary to pass bills, the bill also threatens to add new mandatory minimums for violent crimes. Attempts to reform the prison system are likely to fuel the prison system because of the perverse incentives that structure out our political system. Prison guards, private prison companies like the Corrections Corporation of America, contractors that provide services in prisons, and firms that profit off prison labor are all concentrated interest groups that benefit from incarceration. Meanwhile, the costs of operating prisons are widely dispersed across a population that has little incentive to research prisons and largely thinks prisons are necessary for their protection. Those most substantially harmed by the prison system are prisoners who are not able to vote or go lobby their representatives. Felon disenfranchisement limits their political power even after they are released from prison. Their family members and neighbors have their political power limited, because prisoners are often counted on the census for the area they are incarcerated, not the area they were forcibly taken from. This means that regions that profit from prisons have increased political representation, while regions that are scarred by mass incarceration are disenfranchised. This phenomenon is called prison-based gerrymandering. Political incentives have given us a prison system that may be immune to humane reform. Given the violence and harm caused by the prison system, the goal should be something more radical: prison abolition. We should use every tool at our disposal to help keep people out of the state's brutal prison system. This can mean filming cops, helping people encrypt possibly incriminating communications and transactions, or urging juries to nullify unjust laws. We should support those caged by the system. This can mean writing them letters or donating to their legal defense fund or commissary. But perhaps more importantly, we should act to end the state's monopoly on law, security, and justice. As Bruce Benson documents in The Enterprise of Law, prisons and criminal law displace a system of customary tort law. A customary legal system based on restitution for victims was replaced by an authoritarian system that diverted resources towards the state's rulers and their cronies. That authoritarian plunder is precisely how our current justice system operates, and it has disastrous consequences. Police have incentives to focus on victimless crimes like drug dealing and sex work, because investigating such crimes allows them to profit from civil asset forfeiture in a way they cannot in rape or murder cases. This emphasis on vice crimes leads to discriminatory enforcement and the criminalization of entrepreneurship that is essential for some people's survival, particularly those who are excluded from the formal economy. Moreover, criminal law is not based on demonstrating harm, but on state edict. Therefore, a litany of crimes can be created on the whims of rent-seeking special interest groups and moralist busybodies alike. So we see a long parade of bootleggers and Baptists producing authoritarian law after authoritarian law, filling the state's cages. Ultimately, this leaves many people unable to rely on the state system of law enforcement. Communities of color see police as an occupying army rather than their protectors. Drug dealers and sex workers are surely unable to trust police, as their professions are treated as crimes. Immigrants fear that contact with police means they will be swept up by the federal government's Secure Communities program and deported. Surveys show that a majority of transgender individuals are uncomfortable seeking police assistance. Sexual assault survivors correctly fear that police will dismiss them and victim blame them. If a rape kit is taken, it will likely join a massive backlog of untested rape kits, while police resources are funneled towards militarization and vice enforcement's lucrative legal plunder. Prison abolition should create entrepreneurial alternatives to the state's monopoly on law, security, and justice. The Audre Lorde Project in New York City runs the Safe Outside the System collective to help combat hate violence without calling the police. Such community projects are one way to fill the void. Private security firms are another. Cryptography and other innovations have potential to help us build the new law and the shell of the old faster than we ever could before. The state's legal system is a predatory system. It is a system of plunder and violence that exacerbates inequality, ruins lives, and enables the very crimes it claims to punish. It's time to abolish prisons, and to abolish prisons, we must abolish the state. You've been listening to Feed 44, a project of C4SS, otherwise known as the Center for a Stateless Society. Learn more at c4ss.org.